Perfect. Well, good afternoon. Welcome, everyone, to a special town hall meeting marking the 160th anniversary of Ottawa University. Thank you all for being here this afternoon as we go back to the 1860s, and I expect even earlier, to explore the founding of the university and the legacy that our unique history has left for OU and for all of us today. Now, there are lots of ways, of course, that we could choose to celebrate this important milestone in the life of Ottawa University. We could have had a party with a birthday cake and funny hats. We could give away t-shirts and koozies and frisbees with our logo and 160 plastered across them. Or we could use this moment as an opportunity to reflect on our heritage as an institution and those elements of our story that have set us apart through our history and distinguish us still today. So sorry, everybody, no cake, no koozies, but today will be a time for us to learn together as a community about what happened 160 and more years ago here in Ottawa, here on the banks of the Méridezine River, and how those events shaped our mission, shaped our character, our Ottawa spirit, and made us the genuinely distinctive university that we are today. And we could not have a better group of people with us this afternoon to explore this topic than the three accomplished historians who I will soon be yielding the screen to. I am very thrilled that David Dry, an OU alum and citizen of the Ottawa tribe of Oklahoma, and John Mark Lambertson, another OU graduate, agreed to share their expertise today, and that our resident historian and webinar guru, Stephen Foulke, agreed to introduce and guide the program. After their presentations, there will be time for questions, which I will moderate. So please, if any come to mind, I encourage you to put them in the chat, and the group will address them toward the end of our time together. That being said, thank you all for being here. Thank you for being important parts of Ottawa's story today. And I'll turn it over to Professor Foulke.
Yeah, thank you very much. It's terrific to see you all here, and it's terrific to have David and John Mark with us today. Both have deep links to everything associated with Ottawa University, and then some. They're remarkable individuals. I'm actually going to have them, in a way, kind of introduce themselves here in a moment. But I'm reminded of William Faulkner's quote, "The past is never dead. It's not even past. All of us labor in webs of heredity and environment, of desire and consequence, of history and eternity." What a moment. What a moment to be talking about the past. What a moment to be thinking about the present and the future. So let's start with John Mark. I'm real interested, John. If you just talk, so it's how did you get to this point? Why? Can you talk a little bit before you jump into your prepared remarks? Can you talk a little bit about your connection to Ottawa University and help us get a better sense of who you are?
Unmute. Can you hear me now?
We certainly can.
Okay, good. Yeah, I'd be happy to give a little bit of background. I am the proud beneficiary of numerous generations of Ottawa University graduates and all that is part of my background and makeup. I'm one of 5 generations of my family to either be graduates or serving on the Board of Trustees of Ottawa University going back to 1874. My father and mother were both OU grads. My father was a Baptist minister, and they were very much interested in history and certainly history of their alma mater, and that is kind of where I became enamored also with this story, and particularly the story about Jotham and Eleanor Meeker.
Very good. Thank you for that. And David, we'll get to you in just a moment, but let's, John, I know you want to talk about the Meekers and much more. So why don't you go ahead, get us started here, please.
All right, sure. Be happy to. This is really an amazing and pretty unique story, I believe, in American history and in relationships, history of relationships between native populations and the Anglos in North America. And I want to start by simply reminding everybody, not that I should have to, but in the middle of the 19th century, the feelings, the relationships between the white population in this country and the native peoples that had been pushed out to the farther western borders could probably be described best as wary, if not of disdain, animosity, hatred, grievances. Again, very strong feelings, both directions for very, very good reasons. By the mid 1800s, we'd had 200 years worth of native lands being taken over and possessed by white interlopers and who pushed them farther west, developed a treaty, broke the treaty, pushed them farther west, developed a treaty, broke the treaty, pushed them farther west. Again, there were lots of reasons for there to be strong negative feelings between these two populations. And tragically, even though the whites had been making huge inroads as far as pushing the Indians off of their lands, the whites, even though that horrible phrase, the only good Indian is a dead Indian, hadn't been coined yet, unfortunately, that was the viewpoint, I think, of too many Americans at this particular time. And they just wanted the Indians to go away, disappear, go off west, and be out of the way. And so I'm starting from that basis of saying, in the mid-19th century, there were precious few advocates for Native American people in America at that time. Now, we were starting to have the rise of the abolitionist movement in the North, and especially in New England, who were concerned about the plight of slaves in the South, but people were much, much less concerned about the plight and the lives of the native peoples that had been pushed off of their lands repeatedly and were now out on the western edges. So this story is really about two of those advocates who were out there putting themselves on the line to be of benefit, hopefully, to one particular tribe, the Ottawas. And so that's what I'm going to be exploring today. I want to start first by simply mentioning there was a man who was probably the foremost advocate for benefiting, protecting, uplifting native populations, and that was the Reverend Isaac McCoy. I won't go into great detail about him. He has a very kind of mixed history and legacy, but he was the promoter and the mentor for Reverend Jotham Meeker and recruited Meeker to go onto the mission field in 1825 when Meeker was just a young 21-year-old printer from Cincinnati. So Meeker went up at McCoy's bidding to work among the Potawatomis in Michigan Territory. Later, he was at a mission with Ottawa Indians in Michigan Territory, and then later on the Chippewas. And it was while he was up in Michigan Territory and working among the Chippewas that he did something really pretty remarkable that would earn him a place in the annals of American Indians in North America on its own. He developed his own orthography of putting numerous Algonquin Indian languages into a written form for the very first time in history. And not only was that kind of a first, but it was a surprisingly easy system to both learn and to teach others to be able to read and write in their own language. Again, there were several Indian tribes that had roots from the Algonquin Indians or part of that consortium, and the Ottawas were one, the Potawatomis, the Delawares, the Shawnees, several others, and Meeker was able to put all of these different Indian languages into a written form for the very first time. Off of that success, they'd already had the Indian Removal Act of 1830, in which the federal government, by coercion and force and various other means, treaties, had moved or was in the process of moving all the or nearly all of the Indian populations that were east of the Mississippi into the new Indian country, which was basically Nebraska, Kansas, Oklahoma. Meeker came west with his new bride, Eleanor Richardson Meeker, and they came out to Westport, now Kansas City, in 1833. And one of the significant pieces of their baggage was that he brought along a secondhand printing press, and it was the first printing press to be put in operation in the state of Kansas. It was only about the third or fourth printing press anywhere west of St. Louis on the North American continent. So a real pioneer as far as that particular profession. And in the next 4 years at Shawnee, he did prolific work of printing thousands and thousands of pages in these various languages, including the Ottawas, of printing religious pieces, hymns, educational works for helping with teaching children and adults both in their language. And it was really a remarkable start as far as his efforts. But his goal was really to settle among the Ottawas. And 4 years later, he got all the necessary permissions from the federal government, from the Baptist Missionary Board, and most importantly, from the Ottawa tribal leadership to come down to the Meridazine River with his wife and small family. They had a couple of adopted Indian children, and set up housekeeping on the banks of the Meridazine River. They moved into a rough little log hut that had no window, no door, no chimney. It was supposed to be a stable, and that was their first home among the Ottawas. The Ottawa tribal leadership had agreed to let this earnest young man to come and settle among them because he seemed kind of inoffensive, but they weren't, chomping at the bit to have him living with them. But he was wanting to propose the idea of establishing a school, and they thought that there might be some benefits to come out of this. So he was allowed to settle there. What occurred in the following 18 years was really kind of an amazing transformation of the Ottawa tribe in Kansas. And, we can debate the various pros and cons of it, but it was a matter where over time, there were changes made within the tribal leadership and the habits of the people and so forth that made it easier for them to somewhat partially assimilate as the white world surrounded them and kind of overran them. And Meeker and his wife were key as far as bringing about some of those developments. It was not an easy task that he was setting out on, and I want to go into specifically some of these main areas of focus of his missionary efforts. But I want to give you kind of a perspective of how wide-ranging he and his wife's efforts were, that over the following 18 years, as he developed a bond and a relationship with the members of the Ottawa tribe, these are the different roles that he eventually took on. Listen to this carefully. He eventually served as their minister and their doctor. He became their teacher and tribal advisor. He served as an attorney, interpreter, and farming instructor, as well as a negotiator, surveyor, and building foreman. Meeker became the tribal corresponding secretary, banker, social worker, innkeeper, dentist, marriage counselor, music instructor, printer, undertaker, bookkeeper, stonemason, distributor of food and provisions to the poor. Even to the point where when he was aiding and being at the bedside of a member of the tribe that was dying, after their passing, sometimes the next day he would be helping to dig their graves, build their coffin, and at least one time chiseling the tombstone. He was, in his word, a missionary, but his definition of that was to fulfill any potential need that the tribe as a whole or an individual in the tribe might have. And so this whole litany of professions and of roles he later took on for the benefit of the tribe was really kind of remarkable. I want to focus now specifically, though, on how he first established rapport and contact with members of the tribe, because I think it's really rather interesting as far as his being able to acknowledge that it wasn't simply a matter of going in and establishing a church and hoping that people were going to come. He had to go through and do the hard labor of building relationships, one by one by one, with members of the tribe and especially with the tribal leadership. And that took quite a lot of time because, as I mentioned earlier, there were all these generations worth of animosities and distrust that had been built up over years for very, very good reasons. And the way that he was able to first make contact and establish his friendship with members of the tribe was by the fact that he would go out literally in the fields with the members of the tribe, the men, as they were trying to establish their first farms. This, again, was a real transitional time for the Ottawa people in that previously the women were the real agriculturalists, the people that were doing small plot gardening. The men were primarily more nomadic and hunting and bringing back foodstuffs that way. Growing crops was women's work. But under these kind of new rules and what they were being established and the efforts of the federal government to get them to stop being as nomadic and to settle and raise foodstuffs and animals in a particular location, it was kind of a transition. And Meeker was there with those first plows that were provided by the federal government, and he would go out with an individual of the tribe and help them in showing them how to first plow the sod, tough sod, steady the plow, and they would go back and labor back and forth across in developing these fields. And then in taking a break, he would rest with them in the shade of a tree and then bring up spiritual matters, subjects pertaining to their background and their knowledge of a deity and so forth, and discussing Christianity and the teachings of Jesus Christ and so forth. Bit by bit, that was the way that he established himself with one person in the Ottawa tribe after another, of showing physical labor and being their friend and assisting them, and then talking about spiritual matters. And after that type of labor, after 1 year, he had one convert. After 2 years, he had 2 converts. You know, this was a slow process, and the tribal leadership was especially wary as far as the influence that he was starting to have within the tribe after about the first 3 years or so. But this was the process of establishing his friendship and relationship with members of the tribe. I want to emphasize that there were, what I've determined is basically 5 basic areas in which Meeker focused his attention. These were all happening simultaneously. Some were more important than others at the beginning, so I'm not going to necessarily put them in order. But these were the 5 areas in which he was focusing, in which he was trying, he with his wife's assistance, trying to be of a benefit to the members of the Ottawa tribe. First of all, as a missionary, yes, he wanted to convert the members of the Ottawa tribe to Christianity. And through the course of years, he ended up actually baptizing 122 members of the Ottawa tribe. He basically, again, eventually won over and converted nearly all of the tribal leadership and the tribal leadership for many years to come. So it was quite a transformation as far as the Ottawa tribe, as far as their religion and the religious practices, as they had, as compared with how they had lived and believed for many generations before. One of the aspects of this that is kind of complicated, but it involves both his work as a minister and his work as a doctor, and I think it's an important one to mention, is that when it came to the original Ottawa faith and their religious practices, which involved feasts and dancing and various other activities that were part of their tradition, what had become a part of that in more recent decades was huge amounts of alcohol and whiskey that were part of these dances, part of these feasts. And Meeker, as well as other missionaries on the frontier, and government agents were seeing the tremendous detrimental effects of that kind of alcohol and the alcoholism that developed and the devastating effects that it had on the native populations and their ability to prosper and take care of themselves, the hardships and the violence, the deaths, the murders that would come out of that kind of situation, and the renting of the fabric of the tribe through heavy alcohol use. And so there was an element of this as far as the spiritual religious part, that he was wanting them to give up some of their traditional activities, spiritual activities, because of how deeply ingrained the heavy use of alcohol had become as a part of that. Over time, he became successful with that, in that he persuaded the tribal leadership that that was indeed a real serious problem, and they eventually passed laws prohibiting the use and possession of any kind of alcohol within the Ottawa Reserve. And it did indeed seem to have an impact, positive impact, as far as the livelihood, the health of and financial well-being of the tribe. So that number one is serving as a minister. The second one I've already mentioned then is his work as a doctor. He was completely self-taught. He came out with medical books. The Ottawa were used to using their own medicine men, and they were fine with that. But when some of the medicine men activities were not producing the success or the results that they wanted, as a second choice, they would sometimes come to Reverend Meeker. And over time, they began to find that he was having a really positive benefit as far as their health and reviving them from illnesses and so forth. So over time, again, it was a matter that it caused some consternation within the tribe, in that the medicine men were being used less and less, and people were going to the missionary, but it was because of the success of some of his cures. So that was an important aspect of his work as well. And I want to emphasize probably the most dramatic result of that is that when the Ottawas first came, like many of the other immigrant tribes, their population numbers were just plummeting. And after he had been there among them for a few years and beginning to have a real presence, and they were coming to trust him more and more, their numbers began to slow as far as the loss of life. And by the time he died in 1855, and I've been able to research and prove that it is in fact true, the Ottawas were the only Indian tribe in Kansas that was actually increasing in numbers. There were probably about roughly 24, 27 tribes in eastern Kansas at that time, mostly from the immigrant tribes that had been moved in. And most of them were being decimated by illnesses and various problems. But that was not the case with the Ottawas. They weren't increasing in significant numbers, but they had plateaued and were actually increasing a little bit by the time of his death. And within a short period of time after his death, the Ottawa's numbers again began to decline. This is also represented through many other ways in which, for example, there'd be cholera plagues, which was terribly devastating, that would come in, and they would break out among the Weas and the Miamis to their east, and the cholera would be in the Shawnees and the Delawares to the north, and the Potawatomis to the north, to the south, and finally breaking out among the Sac and Fox to the west. And Meeker, plaintively said in his journal, "We are surrounded by it." But in the days that followed, in the weeks that followed, he doesn't record a single death from cholera, and he was making medicines and apparently advocating for isolation. If anybody remembers the pandemic in 2020 and 2021, using isolation. And there again, it was an effort where his leadership appeared to have significant impact on protecting the Ottawas from a great scourge that was coming through. I use that as just one example. Third area was, and that goes directly to the establishment of Ottawa University is the fact that he also became their teacher. As I've already mentioned, he established this tremendous orthography where he was able to teach in their own language and published materials, teaching aids in their own language. It was a matter, however, that with all this litany of roles that he and his wife were trying to fulfill, serving as teachers and having a school every single day was one thing that they could possibly farm out. And so with the support of the tribal leadership and the Ottawa parents and so forth, the Ottawas began taking their children up to the Shawnee Methodist Mission, which was well established, had good buildings, teachers already. And so there was this commute back and forth of taking Ottawa children up there for schooling, as opposed to when Meeker, it wasn't feasible financially or energy-wise to be able to have a school anymore among the Ottawa Reserve. And so that was handled in that particular way. But again, part of what was established at that time was the thirst for additional education and knowledge that the Ottawa tribal leadership embraced and became very important to them for many, many years to come. And that is also what directly led to the establishment of Ottawa University in 1865. The fourth area that I wanted to touch on is that Meeker served as an advocate or an agent for the Ottawa tribal leadership. He was the point person when it came to their working with outsiders on issues that they needed some assistance on. He would write letters to the superintendent of Indian Affairs in St. Louis. He would correspond with their Indian agent and with traders, write letters even to the president of the United States in Washington. He was their point person if they needed to have a mill built, and he was doing the negotiations with carpenters in Missouri to come in and build a mill for the Ottawas. When it came to those activities and of getting reparations from the federal government from thefts from the Sac and Fox agencies, he was the one that was writing up and drawing up all these documentation for the Ottawas to get reimbursed for losses. The federal government had not been good about fulfilling their promises about some of their earlier treaties, and he would be the advocate who would write and meet in person and say, you promised us years ago that we were to get these harnesses, these plows. You said we were going to get them last year. You said that the year before. He was the point person to go as an advocate for the tribe, and that was another important role he had. And then the fifth and last one that I want to emphasize, and it's really kind of the platform, it's the foundation for all of this other activity, is the fact that he also served as a friend for the tribe as a whole, for families, for individual Ottawas, in that any person that had a need and they thought that he might be of assistance, they would go to him and he would see what he could do as simply a friend, whether that was an ill member of the tribe that was having trouble getting his harvest in, and he'd be the catalyst that would round up several other men to go and get that harvest in. If there was an elderly Ottawa woman who had a broken chair, he'd go and fix her chair. If she was, kind of destitute and didn't have enough to eat, he would see to it that she had food and that somebody was checking in on her and so forth. Those kinds of stories were played out over and over and over again, and it was all part of that mission of his serving in whatever capacity that he could as a missionary. So again, as a minister, doctor, teacher, agent, and friend, those were the primary focuses of his attention.
Yeah, is it fair, John Mark, to suggest that Meeker was a kind of missionary for kind of Euro-American culture? Then our understanding of what missionary means, I mean, it's directed into a kind of one place, right?
Yes.
Adherence to a faith. But it sounds as though you're suggesting that Meeker had a vast influence, a broad influence in terms of sort of a new kind of cultural outlook.
Yes.
Almost strategic in a way, in a rapidly changing world. he's
Yes.
offering them a kind of a lifeline.
Yes. And much of this he learned from the Reverend Isaac McCoy, who had the same philosophy that you
Yeah.
can't just focus on, we're going to go in and Christianize these people. No, there are a lot of other needs that these folks have, and our interest in having them become followers of Jesus Christ is just one element. But there are all these other very real,
Yeah.
sometimes life and death issues that need to be addressed as
Absolutely.
well.
Absolutely. All right. Very good. So John Mark, thank you. We're going to come back. We're going to circle back to Meeker in a moment. Let's come to now to David Dry. David, so this is an opportunity, I think, for you to introduce yourself to the kind of the university community. And so, can you give us a sense of who you are and your connection to maybe to all of this?
Sure. First of all, I'd like to thank Chancellor Tsutsui, as well as Dr. Joanne Bangs and Dr. Foulke for having me here, for considering me for this today. And thank you to John Mark Lambertson for that amazing talk. And I think, hopefully the talk that I have will intersect with yours very well in showing the multiplicity of ways in which, different discourses all came together to kind of lead to the OU that we have today. And so, as was mentioned, David Dry, I'm an Ottawa tribal member, and my connections are both familial as well as kind of academic and research to Ottawa University. So I'm a graduate of OU, but I'm also a descendant of Joseph Badger King, who is one of the founding tribal members, who's a trustee of Ottawa University. And then my great uncle is actually Louis Barlow. And so Louis Barlow was chief of the tribe in the 1970s, and with Peter Armacost at OU, kind of reforged the relationship between the Ottawa tribe and Ottawa University. And so I have those kind of connections. And then my more formal kind of academic research, my doctoral dissertation looked at mid-19th through late 20th century tribal history. And so this is, of course, overlaps with the whole existence of Ottawa University. And so it's part of my academic background as well, insofar as the tribal experience intersects with the university.
Well, it's terrific to have you here this afternoon. And so let's go ahead, take it away, please.
Sure. And so I have a little presentation and a talk to share. And so I'll go ahead and share my screen, and then I'll dive in. All right, so in June of 1862, Ottawa leaders signed a treaty and agreed to endow 20,000 acres of land to establish a school to educate tribal youth in perpetuity. 3 years later, that endowment helped give rise to Ottawa University. As a tribal member and a historian, I've often pondered what tribal leaders were thinking when providing that land for education and what their intentions should mean to us today, 160 years later. If you turn solely to the reports of federal officials in the 1850s and 1860s, you find a somewhat simple answer. The Ottawais desired to assimilate into American society. Indeed, the 1862 treaty itself declares the Ottawa, quote, sufficiently advanced in civilization and desirous of becoming citizens of the United States, end quote, and certain outside appearances seem to corroborate the impressions of federal policymakers. The three tribal members pictured, James Wind, William Herr, and Joseph Badger King, all founding trustees of Ottawa University, are seen in these images from the 1860s in their three-piece suits or their citizens' clothing. Each not only bore an English name, but was also literate, and Wind and Herr signed the 1862 treaty in their own hand, not, as many Indians might have, with an X mark. Each of them was also a convert to Christianity, and two of them were or would later become Baptist pastors. All of these factors might reasonably lead to the conclusion that the Ottawa merely wanted to become Americans, and education was a means toward that end. This somewhat straightforward explanation for why they wanted to establish a school through the 1862 treaty, however, becomes more complicated upon closer examination. In addition to having English names, each of these gentlemen and their descendants also carried Ottawa Indian names. Moreover, in addition to quite seriously desiring U.S. citizenship, each of these individuals also took pride in their tribal community, not merely as an aspect of their heritage, but as a living organization with relevance and authority. Not only were these three gentlemen tribal leaders, with two of them later becoming chief, but of their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren, we find not one, not four, but 8 Ottawa chiefs. In fact, arguably, their children and grandchildren are principally responsible for building the Ottawa tribe into the thriving entity that it represents today. Over the last 100 years, there have only been 16 years where a person not descended from one of them has actually been chief. If not merely a desire to become Americans, what were these tribal leaders intending by working with Baptist leaders to establish a school? I will propose today that for the Ottawais, this treaty was less about turning the Ottawais into Americans and more about turning Americans into relations, even into close kin. The treaty and the new school served as a mean towards 1, preserving relations within the tribal community, 2, maintaining ties to the land in Kansas, and 3, extending networks of reciprocity to include their new, mostly white American neighbors. For the Ottawa, the center of the 1862 treaty and the school was a desire to maintain and expand Ottawa networks of relationality. And so this will be a story told in 3 parts. We'll start with a sketch of Ottawa relationality, proceed to demonstrate the forces compelling the Ottawais to include more Americans within that sphere of relations, and then conclude by discussing how OU fits into that vision and what it can mean for us today. So first, let's step back and consider what relationality meant to the Ottawa. The Ottawa are a branch of a much larger people known as the Anishinaabe, a family that includes the Ojibwe and the Potawatomi. And the word Anishinaabe itself can be translated as those who try to do good. Thus, that identity is intentionally aspirational. And being good was not merely a matter of individual virtue or good thoughts. Instead, it entailed living in right relationship with others. In the traditional Ottawa worldview, all creation is interconnected and none stands above the rest. Yet each being holds relations and responsibilities to other beings. This understanding of the world extended beyond relations with other humans to encompass relationships with various aspects of the natural world, and it shaped how the Ottawa organized themselves. Ottawa political and social identities were defined by relational roles, not from inherited legal rights or formal chains of commands. Ottawa lifeways reinforced this relational practice. The very name Ottawa literally means to trade. In the Great Lakes region, the Ottawa served as merchants and intermediaries, and their prosperity depended on forging strong ties with a variety of neighboring people. And so right here in this purple by the Maumee River is where the descendants of the Ottawa tribe of Oklahoma, their ancestors, originate in the 1700s by the time we get to the 1700s. In these circumstances, to achieve tribal political and economic goals, the Ottawa needed to bring outsiders into closer relations. Thus, tribal success stemmed from building interdependence with outsiders, not the pursuit of insular autonomy or even domination. These traditions of relationality persisted even as the Ottawa embraced new technologies, affiliations, aspects of culture, and religions. And Ottawais approached their relationships with colonists through this lens. Upon the arrival of French fur traders, the Ottawa incorporated them not merely into their trade network, but blended cultures, rituals, and families as a means of establishing close relations. By the time of Ottawa removal from Ohio, many Ottawa claimed French or English ancestors. Many had familiarity in some capacity with Christianity, and some even claimed to be Catholic. Thus, far from being closed off to outsiders and outside ideas, Ottawais actively embraced cultural exchange as part of diplomacy and looked to build productive partnerships with new peoples. In Ohio, some Ottawais along the Maumee embraced the missionary efforts of Isaac Van Tassel, including Lewis King, Joseph Badger King's father, and a mixed-race Ottawa man. Van Tassel and Lewis King worked together to produce the dictionary and hymnal pictured, and King would, as we've heard, go on to assist Meeker. By the 1820s, the Ottawais in Ohio increasingly turned to literacy, Christianity, not by any means to the stretch in which they would later do so, and new kinds of farming in hopes of resisting removal by the amancing United States. And so this is a much smaller group of people, but you see this already happening where people are turning to these strategies as a means of preventing removal by drawing the United States into closer relationships. And though this effort to prevent removal failed, it anticipated later strategies of survival. In Kansas, as we've heard, Meeker's success as a missionary stemmed in no small part from his willingness to enter into relations with the Ottawa based on respect, care, and reciprocity. As Joseph Badger King relates, Meeker trusted the Ottawas and participated in the mutual support that characterized daily life. In short, he acted like a member of the family, and by acting like close kin, he was treated as such. The Ottaways promised Meeker an allotment as if he were a member of the family, and Ottaways honored that commitment to his family even after his death. The type of relationship Meeker established had some precedence and continued in later times, and represented an aspirational goal for how Ottaways sought to bring whites into closer relations to foster interdependence and reciprocity that would ultimately strengthen the tribal community. Understanding that framework helps us see the 1862 treaty and the founding of OU not simply as a step toward assimilation, but as an expression of this older and enduring practice of creating and sustaining relationships. And we'll revisit that idea shortly. But while we can see a desire for relationality, creating a kind of pull, we would be remiss not to note the ways that the Ottawa were also pushed into American society. In the 1850s and 1860s, a desire to avoid being pushed out is actually what pushed the Ottawa toward American society. While Ottaways were building inroads through trade, education, and intermarriage with white Americans on their own terms in the 1840s and early 1850s, the threat of a second forcible removal accelerated the need to foster these relationships. The Ottawa had already faced a forced removal from Ohio to Kansas in the 1830s, and with disastrous consequences. After removal from Ohio, Joseph Badger King estimated that half of the tribe died of homesickness, disease, and exposure on the plains of Kansas within a few years. The Ottaways knew, and it turns out correctly, that death and deprivation awaited them if they were to be removed again. And faced with the threat of removal, the whole community determined not to leave. In making that decision, the Ottawa concluded that their future instead lay in coexistence with the newcomers, and Ottaways searched for ways to build respectful relationships with Americans. Ottaways looked toward US citizenship as one way to build solidarities with white Americans, and significantly for our purposes, tribal leaders also pressed for the creation of an educational institution as part of the bargain that they made with federal officials. And so, at long last, why did Ottawa leaders call for a new educational institution? They certainly did not imagine education purely as an instrument of cultural erasure, as some policymakers did, nor did what actually occurred following the 1862 treaty meet Ottawa expectations. The vision of what tribal leaders wanted to accomplish can be seen in negotiations in the 1850s, 1862 treaty provisions themselves, and then tribal complaints complaining about the failure of federal officials to live up to those expectations in the years following the 1862 treaty. In my view, the school was conceived as a strategy for sustaining and enlarging the network of Ottawa relationships. So the treaty called for 20,000 acres of the 74,000 acre Ottawa reservation to be set aside, quote, for the purposes of endowing a school for the benefit of said Ottaways. Most of this land, or the funds derived from land sales, would be inalienable. This ensured the durability of the new school by providing stable finances and a land base. Ottawa leaders valued that permanence, as they saw the educational institution as a means of perpetuating tribal leadership roles that bound their community together. The 1862 treaty demanded, and this is drawn from an earlier Wyandotte treaty, this exact language, demanded that the Ottawa tribal organization be dissolved and terminated. Thus, eventually, there would no longer be a tribal government. However, in the new school, Ottawa leaders would make up a majority of the trustees. In this way, the school could become a mechanism through which the Ottaways could maintain their authority over a substantial portion of their former reservation, guide the education of tribal youth, and pursue broader tribal priorities despite the loss of an official government. Even more significantly, the new school offered a safeguard against the loss of Ottawa identity within American society. As the treaty stated, the children of the Ottaways and their descendants, no matter where they may immigrate, shall have the right to enter said school and enjoy all the privileges thereof. Ottawa leaders understood that as their people entered American society, they would take on new affiliations through new occupations, relocating for opportunities, and intermarrying with non-Indians. Through the school, however, the Ottawa would have a lasting reason to sustain Ottawa identity and connections to Kansas, and maintain ties to fellow tribal members, no matter what changes occurred in the years ahead. Thus, the school offered a way to sustain relationships within the tribe. At the same time, the school became a space for expanding connections. White Baptist leaders were named as trustees. White teachers would staff the classrooms. And from the outset, the Ottawa anticipated that the institution would serve both their children and the children of nearby white families. This practice was not without existing precedent. In the late 1850s and early 1860s, white teachers Elizabeth Simmerwell and Mrs. N.S. Filson taught on the Ottawa Reservation, with tribal funds covering most of the salaries and the Baptist Home Mission contributing the rest. And because it was the only school in the area, newly arrived white families enrolled their children alongside of Ottawa students. The new school thus extended this existing practice. Ottawa leaders did not view the treaty as simply a land for education bargain, but as a deliberate effort to cultivate relationships and mutual understanding with white newcomers. For Ottawa leaders, the school was one piece of a wider strategy to knit their community and Americans more closely together, an approach that also encompassed intermarriage, cultural exchange, the pursuit of US citizenship, and even enlistment in the Civil War. These choices were not simply about adopting American ways, but about reshaping the relationship itself, turning strangers into relatives and making Americans into kin. In the end, in a history too long to trace in full here, Ottawa aspirations were largely thwarted in the 19th century. Dreams of a shared homeland ended in dispossession, and the quest for equal and respectful partnership was met with racial and legal hierarchies that saw whites seize control of tribal lands and resources. But that the Ottawa vision was not realized then does not mean that it is not relevant for us today. And so a few words of conclusion. If we understand the 1862 treaty was never about turning Ottawais into Americans or gaining a mere legal right to education, it changes how we should respond. If the treaty was merely a contract outlining a right to education, we would need to work toward a very different set of aspirations than if we understood the treaty as a desire for connection. A right is fixed, and it's often taken for granted. It is something bestowed and possessed, a kind of one-way transaction. Connection, by contrast, is alive and shifting. It grows or fades over time, and it must be earned, tended, and renewed. It places obligations on everyone involved and depends on mutual respect. Qualities of formal right alone cannot guarantee. To honor the relational vision of tribal leaders of the 1860s is to see OU as an institution that helps us all become relatives. If that is the case, each of us, whether a tribal descendant, an alumni, a faculty, a student, a friend, has a part to play in that work of relationality. And our challenge is to imagine what relational reciprocity can look like in our own time and to work towards it. And so in the spring of 2026, I will have the privilege of teaching a course at OU on the history of the Ottawa tribe, and tribal members will be among the students. Tribal elders will join us as guest speakers. The course will, in this way, bring together Ottawa people who may not have ever met before. It will help nurture relationships within the tribal community. And as mentioned, I believe this was always an aspiration of tribal leaders in founding OU. At the same time, the class will welcome OU students of any background. And I hope this experience will give those students not only a deeper knowledge for their own life journey, but also enduring connections with classmates who are tribal members and with the tribal community. I believe this too was among the founding aspirations of tribal leaders. So in addition to a historian who studies the Ottawa tribe, I've mentioned I'm a descendant of Joseph Badger King, a founding trustee, and my great uncle is Louis Barlow. I believe both those men envisioned exactly this kind of future, right? A university that could stand as a shared space where lasting relationships of all kinds could take root. And I stand here today as a grateful OU alumni and a beneficiary of the relationships that they forged. Thank you for having me here today.
Well, heady stuff indeed. Thank you very much, David. And thank you, John Mark. Fascinating presentations, and you've put a number of amazing and complex ideas into play. So Bill, you questions you may have and questions from the audience. So Bill, let me turn it over to you for a second.
Well, first of all, I just want to say huge thanks to John Mark and to David and to Steve. That was really amazing. I feel like I've learned so much. Let me encourage members of the audience to please put their questions into the chat. I saw one come through, but I'm sure there will be more. And of course, needless to say, as a historian, I have questions of my own. And I'll ask those in just a second. But before I do, I wanted to introduce two very important people who are with us and give them, if they so choose, an opportunity to say a few words to add to this conversation. So first of all, I would like to give a shout out to the chief of the Ottawa Tribe of Oklahoma, Chief Gene Epperson, who is with us. And second, then, to Chancellor Emeritus of Ottawa University, Kevin Eichner, who played such an important role in restarting the relationship between the university and the tribe. Gene, would you like to say a few words? He looks like he may have frozen up to me. While that technology is working out, Kevin, would you like to say something? So I can't believe Kevin doesn't want to say something. We will come back to them later. And that, I don't know if it's on their ends or our ends with unmuting them, but we'll do that. So I've got a couple questions for the group. And I have to say, I just loved the perspectives you provided. I love the fact, John Mark, you talked about Jotham Meeker and the multiplicity of roles that he held. And all I could think as I heard that is how the tradition, the standard he set is still maintained by all the faculty of staff of Ottawa University today, because we all wear so many hats in this institution and do so many different things. So from that very time on the frontier, we have learned that if something needs to be done, we just want to dive in and do it. And David, your perspectives, I think, on relationships could not be more appropriate and more timely. You extended my horizons and getting me to think about how the Ottawa tribe thought about those relationships, but also underlined how important what we are doing is today. So let me ask you a very historian-y question and then a very unfair question for historians. So I'll start with the historian-y question. You know, I'd love to hear a little bit about the sources you use to tell your stories and where, if people wanted to go back and hear, at least through reading, the voices of the Meekers or of the leaders of the Ottawa tribe in the 1860s, where they could do that.
In on that one? Can you hear me? As far as the information on the Meekers, we are very blessed by the fact that Reverend Meeker kept a daily journal for many, many years. There are also a great many of the letters that he and Eleanor wrote, which have also been preserved, and they're all at the Kansas State Historical Society. Much of that information is available online now. Some of it you have to, I think, go there in person to see some of the microfilm and so forth. But it's a wonderful wealth of information. There are also the records and letters of other missionaries and Indian agents that the Meekers worked with. My great sadness in the research that I've done on the Meekers, though, is that we have such a tiny, tiny amount of information of contemporaries of the Meekers that were members of the Ottawa tribe. We are so short as far as being able to fully understand the perspective of members of the tribe that knew Meeker and his work and so forth. The interview done with Joseph Badger King that was printed with by the Kansas State Historical Society is one of the very few pieces. And again, I'm so grateful that Chief King sat for that interview so many, many years ago, over a century ago. But that is the greatest omission that we have when it comes to the Meeker story, in that what we mostly have to work with are his writings, her writings, their white contemporary missionary writings and others that worked closely with them, we're short as far as having much firsthand information directly from members of the Ottawa tribe, unfortunately.
And just to echo that, I am absolutely reliant on Meeker when I'm talking about the 1840s or early 1850s. But because of his work, interestingly enough, in the National Archives has letters to and from the Department of Indian Affairs. And in the late 1850s, as treaty negotiations are going on and into the 1860s, we have actually quite a bit of correspondence from tribal members. And so there's nothing in that period where Meeker's around, but after he's gone and as these treaty negotiations are actively ongoing, we do have things written in the hands of tribal members, which is actually very rare for the 1850s, because most Native people in that period of time are not literate in English. And so we do have, those letters are really my principal source for what's going on in the 1850s and 1860s. And they're powerful because they're oftentimes actually written by Ottawa tribal members in a way that's kind of unique for the period.
Thank you so much. That's really interesting. I'm now going to ask you, and I know historians are not comfortable with this, I'm going to ask you, David and John Mark, to speculate a little bit. So how do you think the Meekers and the 3 Ottawa founding board members, tribal board members of the university would feel about OU today and our current relationship with the Ottawa tribe?
If I can jump in first again, David, I think they would be very, very pleased as far as the relationship that has been reestablished. I think one of the great tragedies in this whole story is, and it irritates me no end, the Ottawas did everything that the federal government and the white, leadership of the country asked of them. They stopped being nomadic. They established farms. They improved those farms. They became Christians. They established schools. They were educating their children. They were doing everything they were told that they wanted, that the federal government wanted them to do, and it was never enough. I think it's a great tragedy that they ended up moving on to Oklahoma. And my personal belief is that if Reverend Meeker had survived more years, that would never have happened. I think they would have ended up being settled, established, beloved neighbors and friends with their new white neighbors, and lived out the rest of their days in Franklin County, Kansas. But that Reverend Meeker, who always had their best interests at heart, he would have been deeply dismayed at their basically being given a situation where they felt that they had to move on to Oklahoma in 1870. And I think that's a great tragedy.
Just to echo John again, I actually thought that's the counterfactual you're going to ask, like what would happen if Meeker had lived? And I agree. I think it probably would have turned out very differently. And there are analogs. So I'm in North Carolina, and there are tribal communities here like the Lumbee, who for much of their history, it was centered around an Indian school, right? That's kind of what the organization that, if you will, kept the tribe together. That's how they kind of executed, tribal initiatives in the absence of kind of federal recognition and a tribal government in the formal sense of the word. And so I think there's a possibility that could have happened had Meeker stayed alive, in a way that certainly didn't happen following his death. And I think the tribal leaders would be so proud of the relationship that OU has with the Ottawa tribe. I think it's really a wonderful thing. And like I said, really what they've envisioned. And, like relationships, it ebbs and flows, and that's the nature of relationships. And so I think they would understand the history and lament portions of it, of course. But, to see the flourishing relationship that exists today, I think they'd be eminently proud and would only hope that it grows even further in the years ahead. So.
Thank you so much. Well, I see Chief Epperson is back with us. Shall we give this another try? Gene, do you want to say a few words? Okay, Kevin is back with us as well. Kevin, do you want to say a few words?
Well, good to see all of you, and it's a wonderful celebration. I was just reflecting, it was 10 years ago we were doing the sesquicentennial, and that's just incredible that we are here now in our 160th. I would say, and I think a number of you know this, that one of the things that I was proudest to be a part of during my time at Ottawa was I would call it the reinvigoration of the treaty, and with the unanimous support of the Board of Trustees to extend the offering to all of Ottawas, including, not only tuition, but room and board on our residential campuses. At the time, we only had one. Now we have two. And of course, opening up our adult and graduate programs. And it's extraordinary that it took so long to do that on the one hand, but on the other hand, we've had, I know, several hundred now graduates. And personally, I'm very proud of that for the university. And I would hope that the Meekers would feel good about that, as well as other founders from that time. And so good to have all of you in front of me today. It's been a while. So appreciate everybody celebrating this special moment in the history of our school.
Thanks so much, Kevin, and thanks for your important leadership in making the relationship so strong today. It is still very much felt on all our campuses. So we have a number of questions, and the first question I have is from my old friend Virgil Dean, who served for many years as editor of the journal Kansas History at the Kansas State Historical Society in Topeka. And Virgil asks, as I recall, Isaac McCoy actively promoted smallpox vaccination of the native peoples. Was Meeker involved with this effort?
The answer to that is yes, not in too direct of a way, but he did participate in some smallpox vaccinations with the Ottawa tribe on at least one occasion. And again, I think it was a matter where somebody had to do some serious persuading as far as having the Indians being trustful with this particular maneuver, and they would have a lot of reason not to be trustful. But yes, that did occur. In fact, it's even interesting in Meeker's journal, he even reports, oddly, at one particular point, that he took some smallpox scabs and saved them for potential eventual use. I mean, it was kind of part of his arsenal with various other medicines and so forth that he used. But I recall that he had some actual scabs from smallpox that he thought might end up being helpful or useful, possibly for him to try to do some inoculations at a later date as well.
What a great timely question. The next couple here are from Diana Starisinik Dean, who is the director of the Franklin County Historical Society, and who had also been a wonderful speaker today, frankly, because in the early history of the university, we know the Baptist Church is very important. The Ottawa tribe is, of course, essential, but the city of Ottawa also becomes a player very soon thereafter as well. So Diana's first question is, did the Ottawa tribe's goals of partnership with white Americans affect their relationships with other tribes? And that sounds like a question for David.
Sure, that's a great question, and absolutely. And so you can see it in Kansas. It's an interesting case because many other tribes are adopting the same course of action, right? So some are accepting removal, some are trying to accept allotment and citizenship in lieu of removal. Some tribes literally split over the issue, with some members becoming citizens and some on a diminished reservation or removal. But this is, again, a trend that exists before this treaty as well as after. And so when we get to Indian territory, you have in the 1870s and 1880s, the federal government really having a heavy hand in forcing Native people to comply with federal policies, not really allowing any kind of independent autonomy. And Ottawa people are responding to that negatively and wanting to change that relationship. And so Ottawa people see citizenship as a path towards, again, a better relationship, one built on equality, mutual respect, as opposed to, you being wards of the federal government, you being, essentially the children of the Bureau of Indian Affairs. And so Ottawa people are embracing allotment and United States citizenship in Indian territory at a time when many other tribal communities see that as a threat, right? They see it as something that is going to dissolve their tribes, the way that they understand them, disappear their nations. And so Ottawa people are embracing that, and other Native peoples in Indian territory in particular are responding negatively. And so you do see these tensions that exist as Ottawa people sometimes will embrace policies that other people, other Native peoples are kind of rejecting. But in Ottawa County, there are 8 tribes located there, all very similar demographically in many ways to the Ottawa in terms of their size. And there you see more consensus, as many other tribes are actually adopting the same strategies. And so it's oftentimes bigger tribes like the Cherokees, where their nation really can exist the way that it had historically with some of those policies that you see the real pushback.
Wonderful. And the second question, I think, is pointed towards John Mark, and that is, did the Meekers come from families that leaned into missionary work? So was this a family business, as it were?
I don't know of anybody else in Meeker's family that served as a missionary. Eleanor's family, she came from, her mother was deeply, deeply religious, and they came from actually a Quaker background in Philadelphia. A lot of her ancestry. Meeker, I don't really know of any others. He actually, I don't think, came out of a religious background. My understanding is that it was his embracing the Baptist faith and becoming a Christian that led to his mother's conversion to becoming a Christian as well. So that was an effort or a situation where a son kind of got his mother to become a Christian as well, rather than the other way around. So I would say the answer is really no, as far as Meeker, and Eleanor had a stronger religious background. She also had a great-grandfather who was quite a prolific minister, I should add, as well.
Can I just follow up on that, John? I know you talked about the Shawnee Mission and the mission school there. I was just wondering, are there other examples of either missionary couples or single missionaries in this region at the same time who had the kind of presence and impact that the Meekers did?
Question. There were numerous missionaries, Baptist, Presbyterian, Quaker, Methodist, etc., in the region. I'm not sure that any of them had ended up establishing the same level of bond that Jotham and Eleanor Meeker established with the Ottawas. And the statistics suggest that the Baptist mission with the Ottawas, was much more successful, if you want to use numbers. There were a great many more converts and active lay leadership, and there were just a number of avenues in which Meeker's leadership led to the Ottawas being able to carry on in stride long after his death, and operating their own church without the benefit of a missionary. But back to your original question, I'm not really sure that any of the other missionaries had the same kind of bond and rapport with their neighbors, their brother and sisters, that the Meekers established. And there's numerous reasons for that would probably take too much time to go into. But one thing I do want to emphasize, because I think it is so poignant, is that on his deathbed, Jotham Meeker was, and members of the Ottawa tribe had gathered around and were kind of doing a deathbed vigil, and he was saying goodbye one by one to some of the members of the tribe. And I was deeply moved by the fact that on his deathbed, one particular member of his church that he was so close to, Thomas Wolfe, that it's described about how he kisses Thomas Wolfe farewell. I don't know about other people's understanding of the American West, but I can't think of another time that I've ever heard of a white man and a Native American man kissing each other in that kind of very emotionally charged moment. that is very, very special. Besides the fact that Meeker and his wife were really kind of came to be viewed as the beloved kind of father figure, mother figure of the tribe at that time.
Wow, thanks very much. So there's a lot of interest from people about the course that you'll be offering, David. I think you may have already recruited a few students for your course, in fact. So Susan Slonak and Jessica Nicholson both asked related questions. So will this be a class that anyone can sign up for? And then will it be a one-off, or is it going to become a permanent addition to our curriculum?
Well, I think some of those questions are up to you, Bill. It is a class that anyone can sign up for. Steve, you can correct me. I believe it's a 200 level class.
That's right.
That's going to be offered as. It's going to be online. And so it's online 8-week, the first semester of the first 8-week section, if you will, of the new year in January. And in addition to mostly being asynchronous, it'll have a 1 hour per week synchronous meeting via Zoom. And during every single one of those meetings, or most of those meetings, we're going to have tribal elders that will come in and speak to different things that are part of their expertise, part of their experience, depending on the individual. And so I'm really excited to kind of bring more voices than just mine as well to the class, and allow people to really understand a variety of different tribal perspectives as we go through the history. And so kind of like me speaking about Joseph Badger King, we'll be reading documents by different individuals, and then their descendants will be talking about them. And as well as people that are elders will talk about their lived experiences once we get towards the end of the class, and periods where people are still alive that lived during those moments. So it should be a really powerful class. I'm really excited about it, and I hope we get good enrollment. So.
Yeah, if I can amplify that real quickly, the real-time component, I think, is what it's the most exciting part of it. And so, as David has outlined, it's going to have a variety of voices. So it is going to be available to a wide group of people. It is, candidly, this is a test run, but we have every intention of integrating it into what we do. And it's as an exciting an opportunity as we've seen in the history program at Ottawa in a long time. And so I'm just, again, I'm so grateful that David has joined us in this way, and it's going to be, I think, a terrific experience. So I'd be happy to answer questions offline about enrollment and the like, but yeah, it's going to be something, as they say. So stay tuned.
I want to thank you, David, for agreeing to do it. And I also want to thank you for your willingness perhaps to do it more than once, because I do think there is ongoing interest. And it's very important for us and our awareness of our history to give our students and our larger community that opportunity, I believe. Now, a wonderful question from Kevin Steele out at OUAZ, which I think many of us have been wondering about. As Kevin says, I'm hearing Ottawa and Ottawa. What is the correct pronunciation?
So historically, Ottawa was how tribal members pronounced it, and still today, I think that's true for many. Although Ottawa is also used, and so among the tribal community, I think you'll hear both. And so, but historically, and actually, I think it's Annie King, Joseph Badger King's wife, talks about this in an oral history she gives for the WPA in the 1930s. Tribal members would say Ottawa, and then actually when they're in public schools, the teachers would try to get them to say Ottawa, and tribal members would push back. And he actually wrote a letter to the teacher saying, this is how we pronounced it for, millennia, and we're going to continue to pronounce it this way. But obviously, if you go to other communities in places like Canada or even Michigan, they'll say Odawa. And so there's a variety of different pronunciations of the tribal name. But historically, again, Ottawa was how tribal members said it.
Fantastic. I'm going to ask one more question, and if anyone has something more, please put it in the chat now. But, I'm aware that there are other universities who had their origins in schools for Native American people, Dartmouth College being a very famous example. We here at Ottawa talk a lot about the uniqueness of our heritage and the uniqueness of the relationship we now have with the Ottawa tribe of Oklahoma. From your perspectives, David and John, how unique is this? How special is it? I think the final question I'd have is, how can we tell the story more broadly so it's not the best kept secret about Ottawa University or in higher education?
I guess I wasn't aware that there were very many or any other institutions that had such a tight connection between a Native American tribe in this particular way. So I think it is pretty unique. I guess I need to read more about Dartmouth and so forth. But I think it is very special. And the fact that that is now being returned to and embraced as far as the relationship between the university and the tribe and the tribal leadership and so forth is so extremely important. And going back to your very first question, I think Meekers and others from that time period would really be so delighted, so thrilled at how this has developed and come full circle now.
And just to reiterate, yes, it's extraordinarily unique, right? And I think hopefully is this really powerful reciprocal relationship. So, in my dissertation, I used oral histories that Dr. Kelly Fish Greenlee did at tribal powwows in the early 2000s, right? And so we have this long history that is only growing over time. And I do think it is special. There are, of course, many institutions today that try to cater to their native constituents. The Miami tribe has a relationship with Miami University, but I think in terms of its duration, going all the way back to the 1860s, it's really unique, right? Lots of institutions might be trying to do this today, but the fact that it's this historic connection, I think really stands out. And so I don't know how to tell the story better necessarily, or reach more people with it. But more people should know. And I do think it is really not, if not entirely unique, certainly in its particularities, unique in all of the United States.
Well, I, of course, usually have an answer to the questions I ask, and I did have an answer to that final one about how we can tell the story better. David and John Mark, you both have to write books. And I think that's already in process. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yes, my manuscript is finally done after working on it off and on for 40 years. I've dotted the last I's and crossed the last T's just earlier this summer, and I've kind of lost track now. It's over 400 pages, single spaced, and has over 800 footnotes. So I am going to be in the process of looking for a literary agent first and kind of go that route to see what kind of publishing houses might be taking an interest. Plan B is to work with either University of Oklahoma Press or University of Kansas Press, which I've been in touch with both of those institutions in the past as well. But I'm quite proud of what I've been able to finally put together. I think it is much better manuscript because I had 40 years to work on it, and a lot of additional source material came to me because of the internet. And so I'm looking forward to getting out the full story about the Meekers and his background and the hardships they endured, and what a unique story it is. I use it as a case study of kind of not 100% perfect, but really exemplary missionary activity among the American Indians. And part of my conclusion is how different might our national story be if there had been many more Jotham and Eleanor Meekers out on the frontier interacting with Native peoples. It would have been a much better story to tell than, unfortunately, the tragedies that are so prevalent in our history of white Native interactions.
And John's definitely going to beat me to publication. And so I'm revising the dissertation, and I hope probably after next summer to have sufficient amount of material to submit a proposal to perhaps OU Press or something like that would be kind of the goal. And so it might be a few more years for me, but that is the goal ultimately. And I'm hoping to do it before 40 years. You give me a nice, wide berth there where I have some time. And so if that's the goal, I'll hopefully achieve it.
If it's less than 40 years, you've got me beat.
Well, you know, there are still questions coming in, but I think both in the interest of time and the fact that that's a wonderful place to end, because it's a great teaser for both of you. Because just as David, there will be so many people lining up to take your class. I tell you, John, Mark, and David, there are going to be so many of us who cannot wait to read the books that you write. Thank you so much for being with us today. Thank you for teaching us more about the history of Ottawa University. Thank you for inspiring us about where we've been and I think where we can go in the future. And huge thanks to Steve Foulke, who has been a great supporter of the relationship and of telling the history of that relationship for a long time. Thank you, everyone. Happy 160th. Y'all don't look a year over 159, I'll tell you. Bye now.
Bill.